present about Class 4, which is context of the organization. 4.1 Understanding the organization and its context. For ISO 14001, the organization shall determine the external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose and that affect its ability to achieve the intended outcomes, which include environmental conditions being affected by or capable of affecting the organization. For ISO 9001, the organization shall determine external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose and its strategic direction and that affect its ability to achieve the intended result of its QMS. The organization shall monitor and review information about these external and internal issues, which are issues that can include positive and negative factors or conditions for consideration, understanding the external context, understanding the internal context. For ISO 45001, the organization shall determine external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose and affects its ability to achieve the intended outcomes of its ISO 45001. 4.2 Understanding the needs and expectations of the interested parties. For ISO 14001, the organization shall determine the interested parties that are relevant to the EMS, the relevant needs and expectations of these interested parties, which of these needs and expectations become its compliance obligations. For ISO 9001, the organization shall determine the interested parties that are relevant to the QMS, the requirements of these interested parties that are relevant to the QMS. And for ISO 45001, the organization shall determine the other interested parties in addition to the workers that are relevant to the OHS and the relevant needs and expectations of workers and other interested parties, which of these needs and expectations become legal requirement and other requirements. 4.3 Determining the scope of the environmental management system. For ISO 14001, ISO 9001, and ISO 45001, all of these three ISO have same requirements which the organization should consider, which are the external and internal issues that are referred to in 4.1, and the requirements of the relevant interested parties referred to in 4.2. The difference of these three ISO is for ISO 14001, the organization shall consider its organizational units, functions and physical boundaries, its activities, product and service, and its authority and ability to exercise control and influence. And for ISO 9001, the organization shall consider the products and service of the organization. And lastly, for ISO 45001, the organization shall take into account the planned or performed work-related activities. 4.4 Management System. ISO 14001, which is the Environmental Management System, and ISO 45001, OHS Management System. The organization shall establish, implement, maintain, and continually improve an EMS, including the process needed and their interactions in accordance with the requirements of this international standard. ISO 9001, Quality Management System. 4.4.1 The organization shall establish, implement, maintain, and improve a QMS. They also shall determine the process needed, which are determine the inputs required and the output expected from this process, determine the sequence and interaction of this process, determine and apply the criteria and methods needed to ensure the effective operation and control of this process, determine the resource needed for this process and ensure the availability, assign the responsibilities and authorities as determined in accordance with requirement in 6.1, evaluate this process and implement any changes needed to ensure that this process achieve their intended result, improve the process and the QMS. 4.4.2 To the extent necessary, the organization shall maintain documented information to support the operation of its process, retain documented information to have confidence that the process are being carried out as planned.
We'll talk about Class 5, which is Leadership. 5.1 Leadership and Commitment. For ISO 40001, firstly, responsible for the effectiveness of EMS. Second, focus more on environmental pollution. Third, ensure that EMS achieve its intended outcome. Fourth, existing other relevant management roles in demonstrating leadership in their respective areas of responsibility. Fifth, ensure that the establishment of environmental policies and environmental goals is consistent with the strategic direction and background of the organisation. Sixth, directing and assisting people to contribute the EMS effectiveness. ISO 9001 5.1.1 General, concerned about the quality management system. Second, existing other key management roles in demonstrating leadership in their respective areas of responsibility. Third, promoting improvement. 5.1.2 Customer focus. The focus is on improving customer satisfaction. Second, the risk and opportunity that may affect product and service compliance, as well as the ability to improve customer satisfaction are identified and addressed. Third, determine, understood and consistently meet customer and related statutory and regulatory requirements. For the ISO 45001, firstly, assuming overall responsibility for the prevention of work-related injury and illness, as well as the creation of safe and healthy work environments and activities. Second, protect workers from retaliation by reporting incidents, hazard, risk and opportunity. Third, develop, lead and promote a culture that supports the expected result of the OH&S management system in the organisation. Fourth, ensuring that the company develops and implement a worker consultation and participation procedure. Next is 5.2 Policy. ISO 4001 Environmental Policy. Firstly, provide a framework for establishing environmental goals. Next, suitable for the purpose and environmental of the organisation, including the nature, skill and environmental impact of its activities, product and services. Third, commitment to improving the environmental management system in order to improve environmental performance. Fourth, involve a commitment to environmental conservation, especially pollution protection, as well as other specific commitment relevant to the organisation situation. For ISO 9001 5.2.1, establishing the quality policy, firstly, committed to improving the quality management system. Secondly, provide a framework for establishing quality goals. Third is commitment to satisfy applicable requirements. For 5.1.2.2, communicating the quality policy. Be communicated, understood and applicable within the organisation, available and maintained as documented information. Lastly, for ISO 45001 OH&S policy, firstly, includes a commitment to eliminate hazard and lower OH&S risk. Comprises a commitment to providing safe and healthy working conditions to prevent work-related injury and illness, and is relevant to the organisation purpose, size and context, as well as the nature of its OH&S risk and opportunities. Third, include commitment to comply with legal and other requirements. Lastly, provides a framework for establishing OH&S goals. 5.3 Organizational Roles, Responsibility and Authorities. For the ISO 4001, reporting to top management on the performance of the environmental management system, including environmental performance. Secondly, ensuring that the environmental management system conform the requirement of the international standard. ISO 9001, ensuring that the customer focus is promoted throughout the organisation. Secondly, ensuring that the integrity of the QMS is maintained when planning and implementing changes to the QMS. Ensuring that the QMS conforms the requirement of this international standard. Reporting to top management on the performance of the environmental management system, including environmental performance. Make sure the process produce their intended outputs. For the ISO 45001, report the performance of the OH&S management system to senior management. Secondly, ensuring that the OH&S management system fulfill the document standard. Thirdly, employees at each level of the organisation must be responsible for those aspects of the OH&S management system that they have control. 5.4 Consultation and participation of workers. There is only for ISO 45001. Firstly, give prompt access to clear, intelligible and relevant OH&S management system information. Secondly, providing consultation and participation procedure, time, training and resources. Thirdly, emphasize the consultation and participation of non-managerial workers. And the last one is identify and remove barrier to participation and limit those that cannot be removed.
I'm going to explain about Clause 6, that is planning for the quality management system. Firstly, 6.1, action to address risks and opportunities. ISO 40000 state that the organisation must have building blocks in place to determine that DEMS can achieve its intended outcome through inclusion of specific requirement around risk identification and analysis. ISO 9001 states that the buildings need to include the influence wider element of the organization. ISO 40000 states that the expression of intent of organization to treat the risk identified. ISO 14001 states that planning must be collaborative effort involve personnel of different level and function to send message that environment is the responsibility for organization with their job title. ISO 9001 states that planning must be fully embrace the risk and opportunity management concept. ISO 45000 planning must be ongoing process to change the circumstances and continually determining risks and opportunities for both workers and management system. Secondly is 6.2, that is environmental QMS, OH and SM, objective and planning to achieve them. Firstly, for ISO 14001 state that the organization must create environmental objective that take into account the organization's significant aspect and consider the risks and opportunities. For ISO 9001 state that person requests must be prioritized. And ISO 45001 state that the organization must establish OH&S objective of relevant function and levels in order to maintain and continually improve the OH&S management and performance. For ISO 40000, steps required to consider to achieve them are technological option and with finance, operations, and business requirement. Steps required to achieve ISO 9001 is workers must create a plan and identify tasks, resource, and responsibility. Finally, workers must get review from the change done by top management for approval. Steps required to achieve them in ISO 45001 is applicable requirement, the result of assessment of the risks and opportunities, and finally, do some consultation with workers. Finally, 6.3, that is planning of change. ISO 40001 states that the organization establish and maintain documented environmental objective at each relevant function. For ISO 9001 states that the organization must determine the change for the high quality management system for more planned and systematic manner. For ISO 45001 states that the organization must consider in proactive manner all occupation health and safety hazard with organization control. The organization consider and their action on environment, that is, for ISO 40001 and ISO 9001 state that usually the organization must have feedback from many individuals such as complaint, product failure from customer of employee. ISO 45001 state that the risk people arising of the hazard can be assessed and prioritized and can control to eliminate hazard and reduce risk.
I will talk about Clause 7, which is support.
For 7.1 resources, ISO 14001, the organization shall determine and provide the source needed for the establishment, implementation, maintenance and improvement of environmental management system, while for ISO 90001, the organization shall determine and provide the source needed for establishment, implementation and maintenance and improvement of quality management system, and ISO 45001, the organization shall determine and provide the source needed for the establishment, implementation, maintenance and improvement of OH&S management system. For ISO 90001, 7.1.1 and 7.1.2, the organization shall determine and provide the person for the effective implement of its quality management system and for the operation and control of its processes. For 7.1.3 and 7.1.4, the organization shall determine, provide, and maintain the infrastructure necessary for the operation of the process and to achieve conformity of product and services. For 7.1.5, which is monitoring and measuring resources, the organization shall determine and provide the resources needed to ensure valid and reliable result when monitoring or measuring is used to verify and conformity of products and service to requirement. For 7.1.5.1, the organization shall retain appropriate document information as evidence of fitness for purpose of the monitoring and measurement resources. For 7.1.5.2, the organization shall determine if the validity of previous measurement result has been adversely affected when measurement equipment is found to be unfit for its intent purpose and shall take appropriate action as necessary. And last, for 7.1.6, which is organization knowledge, the organization shall determine the knowledge necessary for the operation of processes and achieve conformity of product and service. 7.2 competence. For ISO 14001, determine the necessary competence of person doing work under its control that affect its environmental performance and its ability to fulfill its compliance obligation. Ensure that these persons are competent on the basis of appropriate education, training or experience. Determine training needs associated with its environmental management system and, where applicable, take action to acquire the necessary competence and evaluate that effectiveness of the action taken. While for ISO 9001, determine the necessary competence of person doing work under its control that affect the performance and effectiveness of quality management system. Ensure that these persons are competent of the basic appropriate education, training or experience, and where applicable, take action to acquire the necessary competence and evaluate the effectiveness of the action taken. Retain appropriate documented information as evidence of competence. Lastly, for ISO 45001, determine the necessary competence of worker that affect its OH&S performance. Ensure that workers are competent, including the ability of identify hazard on the basis of appropriate education, training or experience. Ensure that workers are competent, including the ability to identify hazard on the basis of appropriate education, training or experiments, and retain appropriate documented information as evidence of competence. 7.3 Awareness. For ISO 14001, the organization shall ensure that persons doing work under organization's control are aware of the environmental policy, the significant environmental aspect and related actual or potential environmental impact associated with their work, their contribution to the effectiveness of the environmental management system, including the benefits of enhanced environmental performance and implication of not conforming with environmental management system required, including not fulfilling the organization's compliance obligation. For ISO 90001, the organization shall ensure that the person doing work under the organization control are aware of the quality policy, relevant quality objective, their contribution to the effectiveness of the quality, and the implication of not conforming with the quality management system requirement management system, including the benefit of improved performance. Last, for ISO 45001, workers shall be made aware of the OH&S policy and OH&S objective, their contribution to the effectiveness of the OH&S management system requirement, the implication and potential consequence of not conforming to the OH&S management system requirement and hazard, and OH&S risks and action determined that they are relevant to them. 7.4 Communication. For ISO 14001, the organization should establish, implement and maintain the process needed for internal and external communication relevant to the environmental management system, while for ISO 90001, the organization should determine the internal and external communication relevant to quality management system. Last, for ISO 45001, the organization shall establish, implement and maintain the processes needed for internal and external communication relevant to the OH&S management system. 7.5 Documented information. For ISO 14001, documented information required by this international standard and documented information determined by the organization as being necessary for the effectiveness of the environmental management system. For ISO 90001, documented information required by this international standard and documented information determined by the organization as being necessary for the effectiveness of the quality management system. And for ISO 45001, documented information required by this document and documented information determined by the organization as being necessary for the effectiveness of the OH&S management system. 7.5.2, creating and updating for three of them, which is ISO 40001, ISO 19001, and ISO 45001, identification and description, format and review and approval for suitability and advocacy. For 7.5.3, control of documented information, the three of them are available and suitable for use where and when it needed, and it is adequately protected. For ISO 90001 and ISO 45001, both of them distribution, access, retrieval, and use, storage and prevention, including prevention of illegality and control of change.
I will present the clause 8, which is operation. The first point in clause 8 is operational planning and control. For ISO 40001 and ISO 19001, the operational planning and control are same, which is the organization is responsible for establishing, implementing, controlling, and maintaining the processes required to meet the EMS and OHS management system requirements, as well as implementing the activities. While for ISO 45001, the organization shall plan, implement, and control the processes described in clause 4.4 to meet the requirements for provision of products and services, including determining product and service requirements, determining, maintaining, and retaining documented information to the extent necessary, and determining the resources required to achieve conformity to product and service requirements. ISO 45001 also eliminating hazards and reducing OHS risk. Next point is 8.2, which is emergency preparedness and response. ISO 14001 and ISO 45001 are same, which both organizations shall implement, establish, and maintain the processes needed to prepare for and respond to potential emergency situations as identified in clause 6. While for point 8.2 in ISO 19001, it must follow these requirements for products and services, which are communication with customers. The organization must provide information of products or services, handle the inquiries, and obtaining customer feedback. Next, determining the requirements. It was defined by products, purpose, legal, and statutory obligations. Next, reviewing the requirements related to the product. It is include review the requirements arising from any relevant interested parties. Lastly, the requirements for products and services must follow changes the requirements for the product. Next point is 8.3, which is design and development of products and services. These parts are only for ISO 19001. Firstly, design and development planning. The organization need to consider for the involvement for user and customers. Next, design and development inputs. The organization shall determine the requirement essential for the specific types of products and services. Then, design and development controls. The organization shall apply controls to design and development to ensure the results to be achieved are defined. After that, design and development outputs. The organization shall ensure the design and development outputs meet the inputs requirements. Lastly, design and development changes. Next point is 8.4, which is control of externally provided processes, products, and services. For point 8.4.1, the general for ISO 14001 and ISO 45001 are the same, which is the organization shall determine the controls to be applied to externally provided processes, products, and services. Next, for point 8.4.2, ISO 14001 have type and extent of control. It defines both control that intends to apply to an external provider, while for ISO 45001, it have contractors. Next, for point 8.4.3, for ISO 14001, the information of external providers, the organization shall communicate to the external providers through the requirements, which are the processes, products, and services to be provided, and the approval of products and services, methods, and the equipment, and the release of products and services. While for ISO 45001, have the outsourcing. Meanwhile, for point 8.4, ISO 19001 does not have any requirements. Next, 8.5, production and service provision. For this part, ISO 14001 does not have any requirements, while for ISO 90001 and ISO 45001 have some requirements. For ISO 19001, firstly, control of production and service provision. The characteristic of the products to be produced, the services to be provided, or the devices to be performed, and the result to be achieved. Next, identification and traceability The organization must use suitable means to identify the outputs when it necessary. Then the organization shall identify the status of outputs with respect to monitor and measure the requirements throughout production and service provision. After that, ISO 19001 must follow the property belonging to customers or external providers. The organization must identify, verify, and protect customers or external provider property for use of incorporation into the products and services. Next, ISO 19001 must follow the provision. The organization shall preserve the outputs during production and service provision to the extent necessary and the requirements. ISO 19001 also must follow post-delivery activities. The organization must meet the requirements for post-delivery activities associated with products and services. Lastly, ISO 19001 must control of changes. The organization must retain documented information describing the result of the review of changes and the person authorizing change. For ISO 19001, it must have management of change. For point 8.6, release of products and services on the ISO 90001 have these requirements, while ISO 14001 and ISO 45001 does not have these requirements. The organization of ISO 19001 at appropriate stage will put in place planned arrangement to ensure that the product and service requirements are met. Next, the organization must save all documented information on the release of products and services, including evidence of conformity to the acceptance criteria and traceability to the people who authorized the release. For the last point, in Clause 8, which is 8.7, control of non-conforming outputs. For this part, only ISO 19001 have this requirement, which the outputs that do not meet the organization requirements must be recognized and regulated so that they are not used or delivered in an unintended way. Next, the organization must retain the documented information that describe the non-conformity, describe the actions, describe any concessions obtained, and identify the authority deciding the action in respect of non-conformity.
Clause 9 is Performance Evaluation. ISO 14001 9.1.1 evaluate the environmental performance and the effectiveness of environmental management system. ISO 9001 evaluate the performance and the effectiveness of the quality management system, and ISO 45001 evaluate OH&S performance and the effectiveness of OH&S management system. Next, ISO 14001 retain documented information as evidence of monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation results. ISO 9001 retain documented information as evidence of the results, and last, for ISO 45001 retain documented information as evidence of the results of monitoring, measurement, analysis, and performance evaluation on the maintenance, calibration, or verification of measurement instrument. Next, ISO 40001 for customer satisfaction 9.1.2, there is no for ISO 40001 and 45001. It's only in ISO 9001, which is monitoring customer perception of the degree to which their needs and expectations have been fulfilled. 9.1.2 Evaluation of compliance for ISO 14001. Establish, implements, and maintain the progress needed to fulfill its compliance obligation. 9.1.3 Analysis and evaluation for ISO 9001. Analysis and evaluate data and information ensured from monitoring and measurement. 9.1.2 Evaluation of compliance for ISO 45001. Establish, implement, and maintain a process for evaluating compliance with legal requirement and other. We move to the Clause 9.2 Internal Audit. 9.2.1 ISO 14001 comply organizations on own requirements for its environmental management system. 9.2.1 conduct an internal audit at planned interval for ISO 9001. Comply organization requirement for its quality management system. ISO 45001 9.2.1 comply organization's own requirement for its OH&S management system. 9.2.2 Internal Audit Program. ISO 14001 ensure the result of audits reported relevant management. 9.2.2 Plan, establish, implement, and maintain audit program for ISO 9001. Ensure the result of audit reported relevant management. Internal Audit Program for ISO 45001 ensure the result of audit reported to relevant management. We move to the Clause 9.3 Management Review. ISO 14001 review the organizational environment management system or planned time interval. 9.3.1 ISO 9001 review the organization's quality management system as planned time interval. ISO 45001 review the organizational OH&S management system as planned time interval. Next, ISO 14001 change in external and internal issues related to environmental management system. 9.3.2 Management Review Inputs ISO 9001 changes in external and internal issues related to the quality management system. Last, for ISO 45001 changes in external and internal issues related to the OH&S management system. Conclusion, ISO 14001 about the continuing adequacy and effectiveness of the environmental management system. ISO 9001 9.3.3 Management Review Outputs. ISO 45001 the continuing suitability and effectiveness of the OH&S management system in achieving intended outcomes. ISO 14001 any needs for changes to the environmental management system. ISO 9001 any needs for change to the quality management system, and ISO 45001 any needs for change to the OH&S management system. Next, for ISO 14001 and ISO 45001, the opportunity to enhance the integration of environmental management system with other business process, and opportunity to enhance the integration of OH&S management system with the other business process.
I'm going to talk about Clause 10, Improvement. 10.1, General. According to ISO 40001-2015 EMS, the organization should consider the result from analysis and evaluation of environmental performance, evaluation of compliance, internal audits, and management review when taking action to improve. Examples of improvement included corrective action, continual improvement, breakthrough change, innovation, and reorganization. When according to ISO 19001-2015 QMS, it is quite the same with ISO 40001, but with a few changes. The action must include improving products and services to meet requirements as well as address future needs and expectations such as correcting, preventing, or reducing undesired effect. Improving the performance and effectiveness of the quality management system are also added. Examples of improvement are correction, corrective action, continual improvement, breakthrough change, innovation, and reorganization. When we go through ISO 45001-2018 OH&S MS, the organization must actively seek out and where possible realize opportunities for improvement that will facilitate the achievement of the intended outcomes of the OH&S management system. 10.2 Non-conformity and corrective action. If we go through ISO 40001-2015 EMS, when a non-conformity occurs, the organization must react to the non-conformity and take action to control and correct it. It must deal with the consequences, including mitigating adverse environmental impacts. It must evaluate the need for action to eliminate the cause of the non-conformity in order that it does not reoccur or occur somewhere else. By reviewing the non-conformity, determining the cause of the non-conformity, and determining if similar non-conformity exists or could potentially occur. And if we go through ISO 90001, ISO 90001-2015 requires that the organization must react to non-conformity by first controlling and correcting it, as well as dealing with its consequences. It also has a requirement to determine if similar non-conformity exists or could potentially occur. A new requirement is to update the risks and opportunities determined during planning if necessary. Another new requirement is to make changes to the quality management system if necessary. Clause 10.2.2 adds that the documented information retained as evidence must now indicate the nature of the non-conformity and now subsequent actions taken. And if we go through ISO 45001-2018 OH&S MS, the organization should have a process in place for reporting and investigating incidents and other non-conformities, and for taking action to correct them and deal with their consequences. It is important that the root cause analysis be carried out on the incident or non-conformity in order to take appropriate action to prevent a reoccurrence. Examples of incidents and non-conformities included, but are not limited to, incidents, near misses, injuries, and ill health, non-conformities such as protective equipment not functioning properly, failure to fulfill legal requirements. 3. Continual improvement. We go through ISO 40001-2015 EMS. It is stated that the organization shall continually improve the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the environmental management system to enhance environmental performance. But if we go to ISO 90001, there are a few things added. One of it is the organization must consider the result of analysis and evaluation and also the outputs from management review, which helps in determine if there are needs or opportunities that must be addressed as part of a continual improvement. And for ISO 40001, it is stated that action which an organization might take with a view to achieving continual improvement in the adequacy and effectiveness of its OH&S management system include enhancing OH&S performance, promoting a culture that provides support to the OHSMS, promoting the participation of workers, communicating the relevant results of continual improvement to workers, and retaining documented information as evidence of continual improvement. That's all from me. Thank you.